In today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast, you guys will be hearing part 2 of our conversation with our friend Zar. Today we'll be discussing hope. What is a realistic hope? What's realistic optimism for the Detroit Pistons this upcoming season? Stay tuned for that in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button on the YouTube channel if you have not already, or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So, like I said, not too long of an intro here. We're just going to get right into the second half of our conversation with Zar. Last episode was our first half of it. Cut it in the middle. This last 30 minutes of our conversation was really interesting and went real long, so I didn't want to make it a part of the first episode. But we're really just going to be discussing hope and what is a realistic expectation of optimism or hope for this upcoming season with the Detroit Pistons. A lot of fun, interesting things we discuss here, so I hope you guys enjoy it. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Stay safe and enjoy today's episode. All right, so the final thing I want to talk about is this. What's the reason for hope? Because, and the reason why I asked, I had this question for you on the podcast is because Zar over the last few years, I think, has been one of the more optimistic people. So, and I know that there was a brief stretch this offseason where you went like full, damn near came over to the Darth Koo side. Like we almost had a Darth Zar moment. But at this point, I think there has been, some more optimism from the community as we get closer to the season. Where are you at right now when it comes to hope for this upcoming season? And what do you think is realistic optimism, I guess is the best word. What do you feel like is realistic optimism at this point? Do you feel like the play-in is realistic optimism? Where are you at? Where's your headspace when it comes to hope and optimism at this point? We're recording this on August 10th.
Well, on August 10th, 2024, I am traumatized by saying that the Detroit Pistons will fight for a play-in spot at this point. So I'm just going to go with hope lies in improvement. And I think they've said this, like they've beaten, if you've watched, and most people probably don't watch every interview and every podcast and every press conference. We do, right? And they've beaten us over the head with this not skipping steps thing. And like, that's one of the main things they've emphasized. And they've emphasized we're going to be competitive. And they've emphasized, we're going to build a culture and we're going to build an identity. And I think those are all genuinely things that Pistons fans have to look forward to this season. Am I going to go out and say they're going to fight for a play-in spot? Deep down inside, do I want to say that? Yes, but I'm not going to go on record and say that just yet. Just because I can't look any dumber than I have the last couple of years. Because I was like 21, 22. I was like, okay, Boyan, Burks. Who else did they go out and get that offseason? I thought Nerlens Noel would be in the rotation. Who was not. Like Ivy, Duran. I was like, okay, this is a much better team than the year before. And they went out and won 17 games. I was like, okay, well, and then they did it again. And they were like, they got a new coach with Monty Williams. And I was like, okay, like really proven coach, right? Like maybe because I liked Casey more than most people. And I thought by the end, though, it was time, right? Like the writing was on the wall. It was time. His offensive schemes were just really outdated, and I think that was what was holding it back. So I was thinking, offensive schemes, we just got Monty Williams. The Pistons might actually now, like they had basically ran it back with the same roster, and that was even sus at the time. I was like, okay, you have Cade back. How many wins does that add? And then you have Boyan, you have Duran year 2, Ivy year 2. I was like, what are these offensive schemes going to look like? And then it started out with Killian Hayes starting at the shooting guard position and a meeting forcing Killian out of the rotation. They had to waive him so he wouldn't play anymore. So now this year, new head coach, right, and a new roster, and you're like, I see the optimism from Pistons fans, and they're like, guys, we don't have Monty anymore. Like, this is the time. Like, we're gonna start fighting for a play-in spot. I'm just gonna tell everyone to pump the brakes a little bit. Not because I don't believe it's true, but I think after you've gotten burned this many times, you kind of have to start setting more realistic expectations. And then that way, if and when they do surpass these expectations, it feels more like a win. So I think honestly, like if we're talking win total, if they clear like 30, 32 wins, that's a huge win, right? Because and I don't like saying this thing of like Pistons fans keep saying, "Oh, we could win more than 20 games this year," right? And like that sounds great in nature, and especially because of how bad these last two seasons were. But I keep pointing back to Cade's rookie year, and that team on paper was not nearly as talented as the two that followed it. And that team, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say won at least 23 or 24 games. Which,
Yeah, I think they won 24.
yeah, 24 games, which is not anything incredible. But I remember at the end of the year, a lot of national pundits were like, Pistons were building steam at the end of the year. Like, this could be a team to watch for the play-in. So I don't like putting the over-under at like 25, 26 and people being happy with that. Because if you go from Cade rookie year, 24 wins, to Cade year 4, 26 wins, what are we doing here, right? Like, I feel like there has to be a happy medium between the Pistons fans who have gotten burned and now are super pessimistic versus the Pistons fans who generally are more optimistic and have also gotten burned, but things keep changing, so their expectations are here. If we can just meet here, I think that gives everyone a lot of optimism. And I think more than anything, a sense for optimism this year is going to be watching Cade, because now more than any other time in his career in the NBA, he has a team that actually makes basketball sense for his play style. And I think that's something that just hasn't happened so far in his career. So seeing where he goes with that type of play style, with a coach that seems to understand his game and believe in him, and with a front office that's willing to make moves to accommodate his play style and his tendencies, that's going to be probably the most exciting thing to watch this year.
So I'm gonna give a little bit of a detailed answer here. I've been so this is a core philosophy of mine, and I truly feel like a lot of people should have this same philosophy. As you should be constantly surrounding yourself with people that maybe you don't consider them smarter than you, but maybe have different perspectives and different thoughts. So that then forces you to reevaluate things you are thinking or you were evaluating. And I say that to say I've been reading a lot of outside Detroit perspectives on what their offseason was like. And originally, I saw someone vote. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Someone vote them to have the worst offseason in the league. And I came on the podcast. I was like, this is insane. Like, there's no way in hell they had the worst offseason. I still stand by that. That's insane. But I've also continued to read more and more people that are smart basketball people. And I've listened to them say, not just talk or write, but also talk on podcasts about it. And they give them like a D for this offseason or a D plus or a C minus. And I've sat back and I've thought to myself, okay, I must be missing something, because I thought they had at least like a C plus, B minus, like offseason. I don't think they knocked it out the park, but I thought it was okay. So I've like, okay, I need to reevaluate. Like, what am I missing something, or am I just overlooking some things? Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, and you'll get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers at ebaymotors.com. And I think I kind of started to shift a little bit the last podcast, but this is where I'm at. The Pistons this past year had a net rating of minus 9.0. So it wasn't like they were a bad team that was close. Like they were getting blitzed. So like it was bad. Like it was bad. I think we all know it was bad. So along with that, I had to kind of remind myself, like, okay, they lost 68 games. like sometimes when you think sometimes when you think like worst team in the league, you're just like, okay, yeah, they were the worst team in the league. But then you look at it and you're like, oh my God, like 68 games is a lot of games to lose. Moving on from that, just to go even further. So like they had a defensive rating of 118.0, that was 25th in the NBA. And then they had an offensive rating of 109.0, which was 27th in the NBA. Along with that, these are the last numbers I'm going to read, and then you guys will see where I'm going with this. Along with that, they were also, oh my God, they switched to playoff numbers. Hold on. Along with that, they were 26th in the NBA in 3-point percentage, and they were 27th in 3-point attempts. So bringing all those numbers to the table, this is where I'm at. I think they obviously address spacing and address the shooting. So the shooting should be much better. If it's not better, I don't know what happened. Like the shooting should easily be better for sure. And if they lean more into that offensive side of the ball, if they accept like this is the roster that we have offensive players, we have scoring, we have shooting. This is what we're going to be this year. I think they could probably hover around like a 15th offense in the NBA, like an average to maybe if Cade's like really that good this year, maybe a slightly above average offense. I think they can do that. But it requires them to not do what Monty did last year and not accept what this roster was. Like you can have a future, you have an idea of what you want the future team to look like, but this current roster, what you have assembled is a roster full of shooting and scoring. And there's not much defense on it. It's just not much defense at all on it. So if they lean fully into their offensive structure, I think they can get around there offensively. Defensively, I think they're probably going to be just as bad. Either just as bad or maybe even worse. Because I don't know. The optimism for defense is this. Duren takes a big step, which we have to see actually happen. But Duren takes a big step. Cade, becomes like a really good defender with less, responsibility on him. And you start Asar, and Asar continues to be like an all-world defender. And then like that's and then your offense being so good, the team is playing against a half-court defense more, not so many transition opportunities, fast break, long rebounds, all that kind of stuff. Like that's the optimism there. I say all that, like, I'm giving like a full-on detailed approach of how I got to where I eventually got to. So I looked at all of that. And then I have seen some fans say to me, okay, well, they had Bojan and Burks last year. What's the difference between Bojan and Burks and Tobias and Beasley? And while I do believe Tobias is better than Bojan, I think Beasley's probably better than Burks right now. Probably. It is a fair question to ask. Like, you had similar type players last year. What's the difference?
Their calves aren't dust.
What do you say?
Their calves aren't dust. That might start. might be a start.
I think so. That all gets me. All those points gets me to this point of. I think the best optimistic view is this: how many teams are tanking for Cooper Flag? Because if there are a lot of teams wanting to get Cooper Flag, the Pistons could make the plan. That's where I'm at. Because if you look at the standings, the Wizards are going to be bad. The Raptors, I think the Pistons will be in the same tier. The Nets, I think, are going to be really bad. The Bulls, I think, probably aren't going to be that good. But the Bulls also, I think, have more established, maybe not more, but I think they have established, like, NBA players. If, let's say, Toronto, what's Toronto going to do? Are they trying to push for a play-in spot, or will they get to halfway through the year and be like, you know what, Cooper, here we go? Charlotte, I think, is going to be pretty good. I like Charlotte with LaMelo and Brandon Miller. I really do like them. So I guess I'm kind of all over the place, but my point is that I've arrived at the point of I don't think the Pistons knocked anything out of the park this offseason. I think I understand why people think they had like a what are you doing offseason, because they didn't really make any big moves, and they kind of just added tiny pieces on the edges. Tobias is a bigger one, but tiny pieces on the edges. And like your point, they won 24 games Cade's rookie year. How can you then win 26 his fourth year. Like, what's going on? What's happened? And I completely agree with that. I think most teams, though, by year 4 would have made like. Would you agree? Like by year 4, with most like players like of Cade's caliber, like first overall picks, by year 4, you've made like trades, like you've made probably like bigger moves. By year, probably like in year 3 is usually when it happens. Like year 3, you go and make like moves to get players in the building that are like impact players that fit more. Like that's usually what happens, and the Pistons just haven't done that. So without them doing that, it's just hard for me to. I want to say they could potentially make the plan, but then it's also just hard for me to say by adding Beasley, by adding a Beasley, Tobias, and THJ, that's going to take the team to like, I don't know. It's just like, I want to say that, but then after reading more people talk about it, I feel like, okay, am I being like biased here by saying that? Because I can see what they mean by, but am I being biased? Like what? I don't know. It's just you're gonna rely a lot on internal development, and you're gonna need a lot of that, I think, to take a really big jump this season.
I want to just talk on that for like a few more minutes, just because it's something I'm really like quietly I believe in, and I just kind of have to chill. But I was talking about this with one of my friends because I was like, same thing with the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. Brooklyn is not trying to be good. Like they're very outwardly not trying to be good. They have Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith left on their roster, and it's very everyone's very aware that they're shopping both of those guys. Chicago, very, very openly not trying to be good this year, right? Like they have to have like a top 5 odds in order to even keep their pick. Yeah. So I think I don't know how they do it, but Levine, Vucevic, whether they're by happenstance injured, whether they happen to be injured and sit out for a lot of the season, or whether they actually finally get traded, I don't think we're looking at Chicago as a team that's really going to be fighting for a play-in spot. I know some people really like the young roster they have, and I see like a lot of my Bulls fans, mutuals, like say, "Oh, we have Giddy, and who else did they get from Indiana? Jalen Smith." Yeah, you have Jalen Smith now, and we have. I'm like, it sounds so much like 2020 Pistons talk, but and then you also are looking at a team like Charlotte now. Then you're looking at a team like Toronto. Then you're looking at like a team like Detroit. Because I mean, obviously, like I think honestly, 9 spots in the East are pretty much guaranteed. It's like Philadelphia, it's Cleveland, it's Boston, it's Milwaukee, it's we all know the list. New York, etc.
Philadelphia, New York, Orlando.
Orlando, yeah.
I think the 9th team. Are we going to throw? Are you throwing Atlanta in that 9?
I would say so, as long as they have Trae Young, just because the roster really didn't change that much. Yes, they don't have DeJounte anymore, but like they still have pretty much all the same pieces. So I think they could be a team that ends up, in the sweepstakes, but as of right now, they still don't have the rights to their pick this year, I believe. So they have really no incentive to tank. So I think looking at the East, it's really like who's going to get that 10 seed. And it seems like a fight that's going to, and possibly, I think this is something we're talking about looking forward to. This is something fans could look forward to. Is it kind of reminds me of at the end of the 2018-19 season, the Pistons were like initially 6th in the East, and then they fell down to 8th. And then there was a point, I think, where they were almost out of 8th, and they had to fight for that 8th spot. So I think seeing that fight at the end of the season, where the Pistons will, I think, likely be in that fight if all goes well, where it's them, it's Charlotte, which ironic, Charlotte was almost the 8th seed in 2018-19. It's Charlotte, and then it's Toronto. Seeing them in that mix will give Pistons fans a level of competitive basketball that actually means something that they haven't had in a really, really, really long time. So I do think, though, on paper, I do think this team has more talent than Charlotte does. And I do think this team on paper has more of a likelihood to make the play-in than Toronto, because Toronto is in that weird range of like they're young, but they're also not like that young. But I also just don't think the ceiling of that team as it is right now is very high. So I do think Detroit could find itself in the play-in, but I'm not going to go out and say it yet.
So this has been a long podcast. We got to wrap it up. But I want to ask
Yeah.
you this question, and then we'll wrap it up just real quickly.
Yeah.
We were talking about Cooper Flag sweepstakes and what if other teams halfway through the year do they want to just tank? Pistons. I thought about, I'm like, how do we know the Pistons aren't going to do that? Like, do you think there's any possibility that we're in March, the Pistons are like the 13th seed? They're 3 games from the 10th seed, 4 games from top odds. Which way do you think they go?
You said 3 games from the 10 seed, 4 from top odds.
Yep. Which way do you think they go?
I think they go for the 10 seed. I cannot under any circumstance see them in a position, because this is very likely that this happens, where they're in the position where they have to decide for the rest of the season, do we go and call the season, be like, okay, we liked what we saw in the first half and we're just going to go and hope for the lottery to go in our way? Or maybe it's not even being aggressive and making trades and being buyers. Maybe it's even standing pat at the deadline. Something like that versus selling off pieces shows me that they're serious about being competitive. And I think it would be a mistake. And I don't really know if I always believe in the basketball gods or whatever, but I think it would be like this season, if you are in a position because this has not been a position the Pistons have been in a very, very long time, where they even have to make a decision at the halfway point of the season because the decision was already made for them. If they're at the halfway point of the season and they're being basically gifted a second chance at redemption by the basketball gods, the light shining through here, and they're like, okay, we actually are just going to hope that the lottery odds go in our favor, then like they're cooked. Like that's it, right? Like that's like your second chance. You just wasted it. It's done. Like you're just proving time and time again that you're not taking winning seriously. And I understand that Cooper Flag is a really exciting prospect, but as we have seen for 2022, 2023, 2024, it doesn't mean anything that you have the best odds, the second best odds. It doesn't mean anything because the lottery is randomized and you could fall to 5th. And then even back in 2020, the Pistons, I think, had like 3rd best odds and they fell to 7th. There's only been one time in recent memory where they have risen, and that's when they got Cade. And that same season, I remember everyone was saying how the Pistons had the perfect tank or whatever, and because they were competitive, even though they lost a lot of games, they were in a lot of games. If we want to talk about the basketball gods, I think they reward trying to be good or trying to win games, giving an honest effort, because if you're not, you're in the position you're in right now. And now this team, because even in 2020 or 2021, when the Pistons drafted Cade, they weren't seen as this laughing stock of the NBA. Even though they hadn't really been good for a while, they weren't seen as like this mess of an organization. And like there's all this talk about like they don't know what they're doing and the factions and all that. The faction stuff about the front office, that was just amongst Pistons fans and Pistons community. The national media was not talking about the dysfunction of the Detroit Pistons organization. Now that's become a national discussion. The way you deter that is by trying to be good.
I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I think it's going to happen. I think they're going to be confronted with that decision. I'm really interested to see which way they go. But we'll wrap it up there. Thank you, Zar, for coming on, man. I appreciate it, bro. I appreciate all you guys making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe on the YouTube channel and leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. Till next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Till next time, peace out.